Arizona Territory, 1873. Golden rays of sunset spilled across the vast open plains, painting the distant mountains in hues of purple and crimson as the day surrendered to dusk. In Prescott, a town perched on the edge of civilization, 20-year-old Abigail Foster stood on the wooden porch of her sister's home, her honey-blonde hair swept elegantly into a chignon that complemented her cornflower blue dress. Her delicate hands trembled as she reread the letter that had shattered her world just moments before. "I cannot in good conscience proceed with our engagement," wrote Henry, the man she had planned to marry in 2 weeks' time. "Your sister Eleanor has revealed the truth about your character. I have made the difficult decision to offer my hand to her instead. She has accepted." A single tear tracked down Abigail's porcelain cheek. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could, leaving her breathless with disbelief. Eleanor, her own flesh and blood, had stolen not only the man Abigail loved but her reputation as well. The whispers around town had already begun, that Abigail was indecent, unworthy, that she had flirted with other men and committed indiscretions that no proper lady would admit to. All lies, every single word. The shadows lengthened across the porch as Abigail crumpled the letter in her fist. In that moment, a belief crystallized in her heart, cold and hard as winter ice. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Love was for fools who hadn't learned that the people closest to you were the ones who could hurt you most. 3 days later, with nothing but a small valise and the last of her inheritance tucked into her boot, Abigail boarded a stagecoach heading west. Further west than Prescott, into territories where civilization thinned to isolated settlements and dusty frontier towns, where a person might disappear completely and reinvent herself. Where perhaps she might one day find a way to reclaim what had been stolen from her. Pike Xander scanned the horizon with eyes the color of steel, his hand resting lightly on the Colt strapped to his hip. At 25, his reputation already preceded him across 3 territories. They called him the Ghost for his ability to appear without warning, and for the way men confronted by his gun seemed to vanish from this world. His clean-shaven face and boyish features belied the deadliness of his hands, and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself spoke of a man who had faced death and emerged unscathed. Unlike the dime novel depictions of gunslingers, Pike was meticulous about his appearance. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his clothes well-maintained if trail-worn. He had little use for the flamboyance of gambling men or the unkempt look of typical outlaws. No, Pike's danger lay in his precision, in the calculated way he moved through the world, trusting no one and relying on nothing but his own skills. "Wagon coming, boss," called Liam, one of the ranch hands working Pike's modest spread outside Silver Creek, a rough-hewn settlement in the New Mexico Territory. Pike nodded, straightening from where he'd been repairing fence. He'd purchased the ranch 6 months earlier, seeking something he couldn't quite name, not peace, he'd long since given up on that. Perhaps a semblance of normalcy, though he knew better than to believe he could ever truly have it. Men with pasts like his didn't get to live ordinary lives. The approaching wagon kicked up dust against the azure sky. Pike watched it approach, shoulders tensed. Visitors seldom brought good news to his door. "Keep working," he told Liam. "I'll handle this." As the wagon drew closer, Pike noticed it wasn't the usual freight delivery or traveling merchant. It was a small personal carriage driven by a woman, alone. His curiosity piqued even as his wariness increased. The carriage stopped several yards from where Pike stood. The woman set the brake and climbed down with surprising grace, considering her formal Eastern-style dress, a deep green traveling outfit that had seen better days. When she turned toward him, Pike felt something unexpected: interest. She was beautiful, with honey-blonde hair escaping from beneath her bonnet and fair skin kissed by the sun. But it was the determination in her eyes that caught his attention, a fierce, unwavering purpose that seemed at odds with her delicate appearance. "Are you Pike Xander?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. "Depends who's asking," he replied, his hand never straying far from his weapon. "My name is Abigail Foster." "I've come from Arizona Territory," she lifted her chin slightly. "I'm told you're a man who knows how to handle difficult situations. I wish to hire your services." Pike studied her for a long moment. "I'm not for hire, Miss Foster. I can pay well." "I'm not lacking for money," he turned back toward the fence. Whatever trouble you're in, I suggest you take it to the sheriff in town. The sheriff can't help me with what I need, her words stopped him. I need justice, Mr. Xander, the kind that doesn't come from a courtroom. Pike looked back at her, really seeing her now. Beneath the proper attire and dignified speech was something he recognized all too well, the look of someone who had been wronged so deeply that the ordinary paths of recourse seemed woefully inadequate. Justice is a complicated thing, Miss Foster. So is betrayal, she replied quietly. Will you at least hear what I have to say before you turn me away? Against his better judgment, Pike found himself nodding. You can water your horse at the trough, we'll talk inside. As he led her toward the modest ranch house, Pike reminded himself of the cardinal rule he lived by. Entanglements led to vulnerability, and vulnerability got a man killed. Whatever this woman wanted, he would listen, offer what advice he could, and send her on her way. The frontier was no place for a woman like her, and his life was no place for anyone at all. Abigail sat stiffly at Pike Xander's kitchen table, acutely aware of how out of place she must appear in this utilitarian space. The ranch house was sparse but unexpectedly clean, with simple wooden furniture and practical cookware hanging from hooks. Nothing feminine softened the space, yet there was an order to it that suggested Pike Xander was a man who valued control over his environment. He placed a cup of coffee before her without asking if she wanted it, then took a seat across the table. His movements were economical, precise, like everything else about him. Tell me what brings a proper Eastern lady to my door, he said, his eyes assessing her with uncomfortable intensity. Abigail wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. I'm not as proper as I appear, Mr. Xander. At least that's what everyone in Prescott believes now. She took a steadying breath. 6 weeks ago, I was engaged to be married to Henry Wilcox, a banker of good standing. My sister Alina was to be my maid of honor. Pike said nothing, simply watching her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. 2 weeks before the wedding, Alina began spreading rumors about me. Terrible, untrue stories about indiscretions with other men, about secret meetings and improper behavior. Abigail's voice remained steady despite the humiliation burning through her. At first, Henry defended me. Then Alina showed him letters, forged but convincing, that appeared to be in my handwriting, revealing the most shameful confessions. She paused, gathering her resolve. Within days, Henry broke our engagement and proposed to Alina instead. They were married 3 weeks ago. And you want revenge, Pike stated flatly. It wasn't a question. I want justice, Abigail corrected. Alina didn't just steal my fiancé, she stole my reputation, my place in society. She made it impossible for me to stay. She set down the coffee cup. I have reason to believe she's done this before to a school friend years ago. I believe she targeted me from the beginning, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Pike leaned back in his chair. What exactly do you expect me to do, Miss Foster? Shoot your sister, her new husband, because if that's what you're after, you've come to the wrong man. I don't kill for hire. Despite what they say about you, Abigail challenged. A dangerous flicker passed through Pike's eyes. People say a lot of things, doesn't make them true, something you should understand better than most. The rebuke stung, but Abigail held her ground. I don't want them dead. I want the truth exposed. I want my name cleared and Alina to face the consequences of her actions. But to do that, I need evidence of what she's done, and I need protection while I gather it. Why me? There are lawmen. Because Alina's husband controls the bank that holds mortgages on half the businesses in Prescott, including the newspaper. Because the territorial judge is Henry's uncle. Abigail's voice hardened. And because when I asked in Silver Creek who might help a woman in my position, your name was the one that came up. Pike's expression darkened. Then you received poor counsel. I'm not in the business of helping distressed ladies recover their social standing. Is that what you think this is about? Abigail's composure finally cracked. My social standing, they took everything from me, everything. My future, my home, my good name. While I've been forced to flee westward with nothing but what I could carry, they're living the life that should have been mine. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. I don't care about attending tea parties again, Mr. Xander. I care about justice. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the distant sound of ranch work outside. Finally, Pike spoke, his voice low. Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, what you're suggesting would require returning to Prescott. I don't go back to places I've left behind. Then train me, Abigail said, surprising herself with the boldness of her suggestion. Teach me to defend myself, to gather what I need. I'll go back alone if necessary. Pike studied her for a long moment. You wouldn't last a day, he said bluntly. The frontier isn't kind to women traveling alone, especially those with a purpose like yours. You'd be better off starting over somewhere new. I can't, Abigail whispered, not with this between us, not knowing she won this way. Something in her words seemed to reach him. Pike stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I can't help you, Miss Foster, not the way you want, he turned back to her, but I can offer you a place to stay for the night. Tomorrow I'll escort you to Silver Creek. There's a stage heading east the day after. You should be on it. Abigail felt despair welling up inside her. This had been her last hope, and if I refuse to go, then you'll be on your own. Either way, I want no part in your vengeance quest. She stood, dignity intact despite the rejection. Thank you for your time, Mr. Xander, and for the coffee. As Abigail moved toward the door, Pike's voice stopped her. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I believe you about your sister. The world's full of people who destroy others to get what they want. Abigail turned back to him. Is that why you live out here alone, because you've seen too much of the world's cruelty? Pike's expression shuddered. I live alone because it's safer. For everyone. In those words, Abigail recognized a kindred spirit, someone else who had built walls against pain, against betrayal. Someone else who had learned the harsh lesson that trusting others led only to devastation. The spare room is through there, Pike said, nodding toward a narrow hallway. I'll be out with the herd until sundown. Help yourself to whatever you need. With that, he strode out of the house, leaving Abigail alone with her thoughts and a dawning realization that despite his refusal, Pike Xander might be the only person in the world who truly understood what she was feeling. Pike rode the boundaries of his property until the sun began to set, trying to outrun the unwelcome thoughts that had plagued him since his conversation with Abigail Foster. Her story had struck closer to home than he cared to admit. Betrayal, reputation destroyed, a life uprooted by the actions of someone trusted, too familiar, too damned familiar. By the time he returned to the ranch house, twilight had softened the harsh landscape. Light spilled from the windows, and when Pike entered, he found the main room transformed. The table was set, a modest stew bubbled on the stove, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh bread filled the air. Abigail looked up from where she was arranging plates. I hope you don't mind, she said. Cooking helps me think. Pike stood awkwardly in his own doorway, struck by how different the house felt with her presence. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, it seemed the least I could do for your hospitality. She gestured to the table. Please sit, it's nothing fancy, but it's hot. Reluctantly, Pike removed his hat and gun belt, hanging them by the door before taking a seat. The domesticity of the scene made him uncomfortable. It had been years since he'd shared a meal with anyone other than occasional ranch hands or travelers passing through. Abigail served the stew, then sat across from him. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, about returning east. Pike tensed, spoon halfway to his mouth, and I can't do it, not yet, she met his gaze directly. I understand you won't help me with my sister. But perhaps you would consider an alternative arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Pike asked cautiously. Employment. I noticed your ranch could use a woman's touch. I can cook, clean, manage accounts. I'm well-educated and hardworking. She hesitated. In exchange for room, board, and a modest wage, I could work here while I figure out my next steps. Pike set down his spoon. This isn't a place for a woman like you, Miss Foster. A woman like me has nowhere else to go, she replied simply, unless you prefer I seek employment in town. Perhaps at the saloon. I notice they're always hiring young women. The thought of Abigail working at Silver Creek's rough saloon made Pike's jaw tighten. It was a manipulative tactic, but an effective one. That's not necessary, he said stiffly. Then consider my offer. I don't need charity, Mr. Xander. I need honest work and time to recover my strength. Pike studied her. Beneath her composed exterior, exhaustion shadowed her eyes. He recognized the look of someone running on nothing but determination and dwindling reserves. 3 months, he said finally. You can stay and work for 3 months. After that, we reassess. And understand this, my business is my own. I don't answer questions about my past or my work, and I expect the same courtesy. Relief flashed across Abigail's face. Agreed, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Pike resumed eating. Ranch life isn't easy, Miss Foster. You might find yourself wishing you'd taken that stage east after all. A small, determined smile curved her lips. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Xander. Pike, he corrected gruffly. If you're staying, we might as well dispense with formalities. Pike, she repeated, the name falling softly from her lips, and I'm Abigail. Something shifted in the air between them, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginnings of an understanding. Pike quickly pushed the feeling aside. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The woman needed shelter and he needed help around the ranch. When the time came, she would leave, as everyone eventually did. And he would remain exactly as he had always been, alone and secure in his solitude. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the small window of the guest room where Abigail had slept. She rose early, determined to prove her worth from the very start. Dressing in the plainest of her traveling clothes, still far too formal for ranch work, she made her way to the kitchen. To her surprise, Pike was already up, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. Good morning, she ventured. He turned, giving her a brief nod. You'll need different clothes, he said without preamble. Those won't last a day of real work. Abigail glanced down at her dress. It's all I have. Pike frowned slightly. I'll send Liam into town for some more suitable attire. Until then, there are some old shirts and trousers in the chest in your room. They'll be too big, but better than ruining what you have. Trousers? Abigail couldn't keep the shock from her voice. A hint of amusement flickered in Pike's eyes. Welcome to the frontier, Abigail. Out here, practicality trumps propriety. An hour later, Abigail stood in the ranch yard feeling utterly transformed. She'd fashioned one of Pike's old shirts into a workable garment, cinched with a belt at her waist, and rolled up the trousers until they no longer dragged on the ground. Her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, and she'd foregone her usual corset entirely, a scandal that would have caused her former social circle to faint in horror. Pike emerged from the barn, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Better, he said finally. You'll still need proper boots and a hat. The sun out here will burn you faster than you'd believe. I'm ready to begin work, Abigail said, lifting her chin. What would you have me do first? Pike hesitated, clearly reconsidering his decision to employ her. Can you ride? Yes, my father taught me when I was young. Good. We'll start with a tour of the property. You need to understand what you're getting into. They rode out as the morning heat began to build, Pike on his rangy bay gelding and Abigail on a gentle mare named Daisy. The land spread out around them, vast and beautiful in its rugged way. Rolling grasslands gave way to rocky outcroppings, stands of pine and juniper, and a creek that cut through the property like a silver ribbon. It's larger than I expected, Abigail admitted as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. 5,000 acres, Pike said, most of it grazing land for the cattle. We're running about 600 head now. Wait. I have 3 hands who work the herd. Liam, who you met, Manuel and Jacob work the north section. Pike pointed to a distant cluster of buildings. They bunk out there during the week, come in for supplies on Saturdays. Abigail took in the vastness of it all. And you manage this alone, it's impressive. Pike shrugged. It keeps me busy. How long have you had the ranch? About 6 months. Bought it from a widow heading back east. He gave her a pointed look. That's 3 questions about me already. Abigail smiled slightly. I wasn't counting, but I'll respect your privacy. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the wind whispering through the grass. For the first time since discovering her sister's betrayal, Abigail felt something close to peace. Out here, with nothing but open sky and distant mountains, the pain of what she'd left behind seemed somehow less immediate. What skills do you have, Pike asked suddenly, besides cooking and writing? Abigail considered the question. I'm good with numbers. I kept the household accounts for my father after my mother died. I can sew, garden, preserve food. I read 3 languages and play the piano, though I doubt that will be useful here. Education. Finished at Miss Hargrove's Seminary for Young Ladies in Boston, my father believed in education for women even if society doesn't. A shadow crossed her face. Eleanor attended as well, though she was more interested in finding a husband than studying. Pike nodded thoughtfully. The books need organizing. Previous owner left things in a mess and I haven't had time to sort through it all. Start there. Then maybe see what can be done with the garden behind the house. It's gone wild, but the bones are still there. As they turned back toward the ranch, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at speed. Pike's hand instinctively moved to his gun. Stay behind me, he said tersely, urging his horse forward to intercept the newcomer. Abigail followed at a distance, watching as Pike met the rider, a young man barely out of his teens, wearing the dusty clothes of a ranch hand. Mr. Xander, the young man called, reining in his lathered horse. Sheriff sent me. There's trouble in town. Dawson and his boys rode in last night, tore up the saloon. They're asking for you. Pike's expression hardened. Anyone hurt? Old Tom took a beating when he wouldn't serve them. Doc's with him now. The messenger glanced nervously at Abigail, then back to Pike. Sheriff says they're saying you stole something that belongs to Dawson. They're not leaving till you show. Tell the sheriff I'll be there, Pike's voice was cold, and tell him to keep everyone clear of the main street when I arrive. The messenger nodded and spurred his horse back toward town. Pike turned to Abigail, his face grim. Go back to the ranch, stay inside until I return. Who is Dawson? Abigail asked, a chill running through her despite the warm day. Someone from before. Pike's hand rested on his gun. This is exactly why I said this place isn't for you. The past has a way of catching up out here. Let me come with you, Abigail said impulsively. I'll stay out of the way, but... No. The word cut like a blade. This is the kind of business you don't want to witness. Go back to the house. If I'm not back by nightfall, he paused, Liam will see you safely to the stage tomorrow. Before Abigail could protest further, Pike wheeled his horse around and galloped toward the ranch. She followed more slowly, fear gnawing at her insides. In the short time she'd known him, Pike Xander had become her only anchor in this strange new world. The thought of losing that anchor sent waves of panic through her. By the time she reached the ranch yard, Pike had already saddled a fresh horse and was checking his guns with practiced efficiency. His face had transformed, all trace of the almost gentle rancher gone, replaced by something harder, colder. Pike, she called as he prepared to mount, be careful. He paused, looking at her with those steel-gray eyes. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me or Liam. Then he was gone, riding hard toward Silver Creek, leaving Abigail alone with the unsettling realization that the man she'd hired herself to was indeed the deadly gunslinger rumors painted him to be, and that she cared far more about his safe return than she had any right to. Silver Creek's main street fell eerily silent as Pike rode in, dust settling around his horse's hooves in the still afternoon heat. Storefront doors closed, shutters pulled tight. Only the saloon remained open, 4 horses hitched outside signaling the presence of Dawson and his men. Pike dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Mills waited on the porch, rifle in hand. Should have known your peaceful rancher act wouldn't last, Mills said by way of greeting. Who'd you cross this time, Xander? Dawson's a cattle rustler from up north, Pike replied evenly. I helped the Ranchers Association track him down last year. His brother died in the process. Mills cursed under his breath, and now he's here for revenge. Wonderful, he eyed Pike. Any truth to his claim you stole something of his? I recovered stolen property and returned it to its rightful owners. Pike checked his Colt one final time. He planning an ambush or a face-to-face? Face-to-face, far as I can tell. Man seems to think he can outdraw you, Mills shook his head. I'd arrest the lot of them, but I'm one man and they're 4, all armed to the teeth. Stay here, Pike said. Keep watch from a distance. If this goes bad, don't risk yourself. These men won't hesitate to kill anyone in their way. The sheriff nodded grimly. Town's grateful, Xander, for what it's worth. Pike said nothing, simply straightened his hat and walked toward the saloon, boots echoing on the hard-packed dirt. This was the world he'd tried to leave behind, violence always finding him, no matter how far he ran. Thoughts of Abigail waiting back at the ranch flashed through his mind. He should never have agreed to let her stay. People near him inevitably got caught in the crossfire. The saloon's bat-wing doors swung open as Pike approached. A burly man with a thick black beard stepped out, thumbs hooked in his belt near twin pistols. "Well, if it ain't the ghost himself," he drawled. "Been lookin' forward to this meeting for a long time, Xander." Pike stopped in the middle of the street. "Dawson, you're a long way from Wyoming. Followed your trail across 3 territories." Dawson's eyes gleamed with malice. "My brother's death demands payment." "Your brother died because he drew on lawmen," Pike said flatly. "I gave him every chance to surrender. Dawson spat in the dirt, and you took my herd. 2 years of work gone because of you. Wasn't your herd, you stole it from the Perkins family after you murdered their foreman." Pike's voice remained calm. "You have 2 choices. Ride out now and never come back to Silver Creek, or finish this here." 3 more men emerged from the saloon, spreading out to flank Dawson. All armed, all watching Pike with the wary respect predators give to something potentially more dangerous than themselves. 4 against 1, Dawson smirked, still feeling confident, Ghost. "I've faced worse odds." Pike didn't move, his posture relaxed but his senses heightened, aware of every movement, every breath around him. "Last chance to walk away, Dawson." "Not happening." Dawson's hand twitched near his gun. "You're going to die today, Xander, slowly if I have my way, then I'm going to burn that pretty ranch of yours to the ground." The mention of the ranch, of the danger to Abigail if he failed, crystallized Pike's resolve. His next words came out soft but deadly. "Then let's get this over with." Time seemed to slow. Dawson's hand moved to his gun, but Pike was faster, impossibly, inhumanly faster. His Colt cleared leather and fired before Dawson's weapon was fully drawn. The big man staggered, a look of shock on his face as a crimson stain blossomed on his chest. The world erupted in gunfire. Pike dropped to one knee, firing with lethal accuracy at Dawson's companions. One fell immediately, a bullet through his throat. Another got off a wild shot that tore through Pike's sleeve before a return bullet found his heart. The 4th man, younger than the others, threw down his gun. "Don't shoot, I surrender." Pike kept his Colt trained on the young outlaw as he rose to his feet, pain lancing through his side where a bullet had grazed him. Dawson lay in the dirt, still breathing but fading fast, disbelief in his eyes. "You really are a ghost," Dawson wheezed. "No man's that fast." "I warned you," Pike said simply. Sheriff Mills approached cautiously, rifle raised. "It's over," Pike told him. "This one surrendered. Dawson's dying, the others are dead." Mills looked at the carnage with a grim expression. "Jesus, Xander, 4 men in less than a minute. They didn't leave much choice." Pike holstered his gun, suddenly aware of faces peering from windows, of whispers starting to spread. His peaceful anonymity in Silver Creek was finished. By morning, everyone would know exactly who and what Pike Xander was. "I need to get back to my ranch," Pike said, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "Handle this however you need to, Sheriff." "You're wounded," Mills observed. "Should let the doc look at that." "I've had worse." Pike mounted his horse, wincing at the pain. "The young one might talk if you offer him a deal. Dawson's gang has warrants in 3 territories." As Pike turned to leave, Dawson called out with his dying breath, "This ain't over, Ghost. I got friends. They'll come for you." Pike rode out of Silver Creek the same way he'd entered, alone and wreathed in violence. But this time, his thoughts weren't on the men he'd killed or the blood seeping through his shirt. They were on honey-blonde hair and determined blue eyes, and the realization that Abigail Foster was now in danger simply because she had associated herself with him. The past never stayed buried for long in the West. And now his past threatened the one person who had sparked something like hope in his dead heart. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness as Abigail waited at the ranch. She tried to occupy herself with the account books as Pike had suggested, but concentration eluded her. Every distant sound had her rushing to the window, hoping to see Pike returning. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in fiery hues, fear twisted more tightly in her chest. What if he didn't come back? What if this Dawson person had killed him? The thought was surprisingly painful for someone she barely knew. The sound of approaching hoofbeats finally broke the silence. Abigail peered through the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Pike's silhouette against the sunset. But as he drew closer, she noticed the stiff way he sat in the saddle, the dark stain on his side. Ignoring his instructions to stay inside, she ran out to meet him as he dismounted in the yard. His face was pale beneath his tan, jaw tight with pain. "You're hurt," she gasped, reaching toward him instinctively. Pike jerked away from her touch. "It's nothing, bullet grazed me." "That's not nothing. Let me help you inside." To her surprise, he didn't argue, allowing her to support some of his weight as they entered the house. Once inside, he sank into a chair at the kitchen table, breathing heavily. "There's a medical kit in my room," he said, "bottom drawer of the bureau." Abigail hurried to retrieve it, returning to find Pike had removed his shirt. The sight stopped her momentarily, not just the bleeding wound along his ribs but the map of scars that crisscrossed his torso, telling stories of violence and survival she could barely imagine. Collecting herself, she set down the kit and poured water into a basin. "This needs cleaning before it can be bandaged," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the anxiety churning inside her. "It will hurt." Pike's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Like I said, I've had worse." Abigail worked methodically, cleaning the wound with sure hands. It was deep enough to be concerning but had missed anything vital. Pike remained silent throughout, though she could feel the tension in his muscles when the pain was worst. "What happened in town?" she asked finally as she began wrapping bandages around his torso. Pike was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Dawson came looking for revenge," he said eventually, "for something that happened up north before I came here. And now, he's dead. So are two of his men." The flatness of his voice sent a chill through her. "One surrendered, the sheriff has him in custody." Abigail's hands stilled on the bandage. "You killed them." It wasn't a question, but Pike answered anyway. "Yes." She finished the bandaging in silence, trying to reconcile the gentle way Pike had spoken to his horses that morning with the deadly efficiency he just described. When she was done, she stepped back, uncertain what to say. Pike looked up at her, his gray eyes shadowed. "Now you understand why I live out here alone, why I warned you this wasn't a place for someone like you." "Someone like me," Abigail repeated softly. "You keep saying that. What exactly do you think I am, Pike?" "Innocent," he said simply. "Decent, the kind of person who deserves better than to be mixed up with men like me." Abigail felt anger rising unexpectedly. "I think I've had enough of other people deciding what I deserve. My sister did that, Henry did that, now you," she shook her head. "I'm not a child, Pike. I've seen cruelty, I've experienced betrayal. Don't presume to know what I can or cannot handle." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps or reluctant respect. "You should still leave," he said, but with less conviction than before. "Dawson had friends. They might come looking." "All the more reason for me to stay," Abigail countered. "You're injured, you need help running this place while you heal." Pike opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again, looking suddenly exhausted. "You're stubborn, Abigail Foster." "Yes," she agreed. "I am now. You need food and rest. Let me help you to your room and I'll bring you supper there." To her surprise, Pike allowed himself to be guided to his bedroom, a Spartan space with little more than a bed, a bureau, and a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. As she helped him sit on the edge of the bed, her eye caught on a small framed photograph on the bureau, a much younger Pike standing beside a smiling woman. Pike noticed her gaze and stiffened. "My mother," he said shortly. "She died 10 years ago." Abigail recognized the defensiveness in his tone, the same way she felt when anyone mentioned her own past. "She had your eyes," she said simply, then moved toward the door. "I'll bring you some food." Later, after Pike had eaten and fallen into an exhausted sleep, Abigail sat by the kitchen window watching darkness claim the land. The day's events had shifted something fundamental between them. She had seen Pike Xander at his most dangerous and his most vulnerable, and rather than frightening her away, it had only strengthened her resolve to stay. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps she was simply trading one form of danger for another. But as she watched the stars emerge in the vast western sky, Abigail felt more certain of her path than she had since the day she discovered her sister's betrayal. Pike Xander might be a dangerous man, but he was also a man of principle. A man who had faced his demons and survived. A man who, despite his protestations, had shown her more kindness than cruelty. And maybe, just maybe, a man who could help her find the justice she sought. Over the next 2 weeks, Pike's wound healed slowly while Abigail settled into life at the ranch. True to her word, she proved herself both capable and determined. She rose before dawn each day, prepared meals, tended the beginnings of a kitchen garden, and spent hours organizing the chaotic account books Pike had neglected. Pike watched her transformation with reluctant admiration. The proper Eastern lady gradually disappeared, replaced by a frontier woman who rode out with Liam to check fences, learned to shoot a rifle for protection, and adapted to the harsh realities of ranch life with surprising grace. The clothes Liam had purchased in town helped: practical split skirts for riding, sturdy boots, and simple blouses that allowed freedom of movement. With her hair often braided down her back and her fair skin taking on a golden hue from the sun, Abigail looked as though she belonged in this wild landscape. More concerning to Pike was how easily she had begun to belong in his life. He found himself looking forward to evenings when they would sit in companionable silence, he with a book and she often writing in a journal she kept private. Sometimes they talked, careful conversations that skirted their respective pasts but revealed small, safe pieces of themselves. He learned she had a dry wit that emerged when she was comfortable. She discovered he had a passion for literature that belied his rough exterior. These glimpses beneath their protective shells were dangerous, at least to Pike, who had sworn never to let anyone close again. On a warm evening when the desert breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, Pike found Abigail sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a pensive expression. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, joining her on the bench. She glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "I was thinking about Prescott, about Alina and Henry." Pike tensed. He'd hoped she had begun to let go of her quest for revenge. "What about them?" "I received a letter today." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "The stage brought it when Liam was in town. It's from my old housekeeper, Martha. She's the only one I told where I was going." "Bad news?" Pike asked, noting the troubled look in her eyes. Abigail sighed. "Martha says Alina is expecting a child. They're celebrating throughout the town. The perfect couple with their perfect future." Bitterness tinged her words. "And she writes that Alina has been telling people I ran off with a man of low character, that I was always wild and unpredictable." Pike felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "Your sister sounds like a piece of work." "She's very good at getting what she wants," Abigail said quietly. "She always has been. When we were children, if I had a toy she desired, she would find a way to make me give it up, either through manipulation or by breaking it so neither of us could have it." She folded the letter carefully. "I used to think it was my fault somehow, that if I had been a better sister she wouldn't have needed to compete with me, but now I see she simply enjoys taking what belongs to others. It gives her power." "People like that don't change," Pike said. "Best to keep your distance." "Is that what you do?" Abigail asked, her blue eyes suddenly intent on his face. "Keep your distance from everyone because someone once betrayed you?" The question hit too close to home. Pike stood abruptly. "We should head in, early start tomorrow." Abigail caught his wrist, her touch light but insistent. "I've respected your privacy, Pike. I haven't asked about the gunfight in town, or the scars on your body, or why a man with your education and manners lives alone in the wilderness." Her voice softened. "But I'd like to understand. If we're going to continue this arrangement, I need to know who I'm working for." Pike looked down at her hand on his wrist, then out at the darkening landscape. The truth was a burden he'd carried alone for so long, he wasn't sure he remembered how to share it. But something about Abigail's quiet strength made him want to try. "Not out here," he said finally. "Inside." They moved to the kitchen, where Pike poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Abigail. She took it without comment, waiting patiently as he gathered his thoughts. "5 years ago I was a deputy marshal in Colorado," he began, the words coming slowly. "I had a partner named James. We'd worked together for 3 years, trusted each other with our lives. He was like a brother to me. Pike took a long swallow of whiskey, feeling the familiar burn. We were tracking a gang that had robbed the Denver Mint. Followed them south into New Mexico. When we finally caught up, we were outnumbered. In the middle of the gunfight, James shot me in the back. Abigail gasped softly but didn't interrupt. Turns out he'd been working with them all along. He was the inside man on the robbery. They'd planned to kill me from the start. Pike's voice hardened. I survived barely. A Navajo family found me and nursed me back to health. By the time I could ride again, James and the others were long gone with the gold. That's why you became a gunslinger, Abigail said, understanding dawning in her eyes. You were hunting them. Pike nodded. One by one, it took me 2 years to find them all. He met her gaze directly. I didn't bring any of them to justice, Abigail. I killed them, every last one. James was the last. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of his confession. Pike waited for the judgment, the fear, the recoil that inevitably came when people learned what he was capable of. Instead, Abigail asked quietly, did it help killing them? The question surprised him. Help. Did it ease the pain of the betrayal? Did it make you whole again? Pike considered this, realizing no one had ever asked him that before. No, he admitted finally, it didn't, but it stopped them from hurting anyone else. Abigail nodded slowly. That's why I don't want to lean her dead. It wouldn't undo what she's done. I want the truth exposed. I want her to face the consequences of her actions in the light of day, not die with her secrets intact. The parallels between their situations struck Pike with unexpected force. Different circumstances, but the same core wound. Betrayal by someone trusted, the destruction of a life once thought secure. I understand now, he said, why this matters so much to you. Abigail's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Sometimes I think it's all that keeps me going. The thought that someday she'll have to answer for what she's done. Pike found himself reaching across the table, covering her hand with his own. Then we'll make sure she does. Abigail looked up, surprise written across her face. We. Yes, Pike made the decision in that moment, knowing it might be unwise but unable to deny the pull he felt toward this woman and her quest. I'll help you, not with violence, that's not what you need, but I have connections, people who can help gather evidence. We can build a case against your sister, find proof of the forgeries. Why? Abigail whispered. Why would you do this for me? Pike withdrew his hand, uncomfortable with the emotions churning inside him. Because no one helped me, because I took the path of vengeance and it left me hollow. He met her gaze. And because you deserve justice, Abigail, real justice, not just revenge. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forged through shared pain and mutual understanding. It terrified Pike even as it drew him in, this fragile thread binding him to another person after years of isolation. Thank you, Abigail said simply, her voice thick with emotion. Pike nodded, already wondering if he would regret this promise. Helping Abigail meant returning to the world he'd fled, risking exposure, facing the whispers and stares that followed his reputation. It meant caring about someone else's pain, someone else's future. It meant caring, period, and that was the most dangerous prospect of all. The following morning, Pike rode into Silver Creek alone, leaving Abigail at the ranch with strict instructions to stay alert. If his plan was going to work, he needed to call in favors from people he'd hoped never to contact again. The town had settled back to its normal rhythms after the shootout. A few people nodded cautiously to Pike as he tied his horse outside the telegraph office. Others crossed the street to avoid him. His reputation had solidified, the deadly gunslinger who had taken down Dawson and his gang single-handedly, the ghost. Inside the telegraph office, the operator glanced up nervously. Mr. Xander. What can I do for you today? Need to send some wires, Pike said, placing several handwritten messages on the counter. Private business. The man nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Right away. The first telegram went to a former Pinkerton detective Pike had worked with in Colorado, a man who owed him his life. The second to a newspaper editor in Santa Fe who specialized in exposing corruption. The third to a federal marshal Pike had once saved from an ambush, now stationed in Prescott, uncomfortably close to Abigail's sister and former fiancé. As the operator tapped out the messages, Pike wrote one final telegram, this one addressed to Martha, Abigail's former housekeeper. Seeking evidence of Eleanor's deception. Any letters or documents in Abigail's handwriting still in the house? Respond through General Delivery Silver Creek. Friend of Abigail. With the telegram sent, Pike headed to the sheriff's office. Mills looked up from his desk as Pike entered, wariness in his expression. Xander, didn't expect to see you back in town so soon. Need information, Pike said, getting straight to the point. The kid who surrendered during the shootout. He's still here. Mills nodded. In the cell out back. Judge won't be through for another 2 weeks. I want to talk to him. The sheriff frowned. Why, Dawson's dead, that business is finished. Not entirely, Pike said. Dawson mentioned friends who might come looking. I need to know who he meant. Mills studied him for a moment, then shrugged. Your funeral if you're stirring up more trouble. He reached for his keys. 5 minutes. That's all. The prisoner was young, perhaps 19, with the sullen look of someone who had fallen in with the wrong crowd and was only now realizing the consequences. He tensed when Pike entered the cell block, pressing back against the wall. I already told the sheriff everything, he said quickly. I was just riding with them for protection. I didn't shoot nobody. Pike leaned against the opposite wall, keeping his distance. I'm not here about the shootout. I want to know about Dawson's friends, the ones he said would come after me. The young man's eyes darted nervously. I don't know nothing about that. You're lying, Pike said calmly, and lying to me isn't a smart move right now. Fear flashed across the prisoner's face. Look, Dawson talked big, said he had connections. But the only one I know for sure is his cousin, Wade Terrell, mean son of a mean fellow. Runs with a gang up near the Colorado border. Terrell, Pike repeated, the name sparking recognition. Tall man, burned scar on his neck. The prisoner nodded quickly. That's him. Dawson sent him a letter before we came to Silver Creek, told him what we were planning. And if Dawson didn't return, Terrell would come looking, I reckon. He and Dawson were close, like brothers. Pike straightened, the information confirming his worst fears. Wade Terrell was a ruthless outlaw with a particular talent for finding people who didn't want to be found. If he came looking for revenge, he wouldn't stop until he succeeded or died trying. One last question, Pike said. How did Dawson find me? I've been careful about covering my tracks. The prisoner hesitated, then answered reluctantly. There was a woman in Denver, said she used to know you, told Dawson where you'd settled for $50. A chill ran through Pike. This woman, did she have red hair, green eyes? Yeah, pretty but hard-looking. Called herself Lydia. Pike turned away, his mind racing. Lydia Jenkins, another ghost from his past, a saloon singer he'd been involved with briefly during his hunt for James. She'd wanted more than he could give, had grown bitter when he left. Now her spite had brought danger to his door, to Abigail. Thanks for the information, Pike said, moving toward the cell door. Hey, the prisoner called after him, put in a word with the judge for me. Tell him I cooperated. Pike paused. I will, and kid, when you get out of here, ride east. Start over somewhere no one knows you. The past has a way of hunting you down out here. Back outside, Pike considered his options. Terrell wouldn't move immediately. He'd gather information first, assemble men he trusted. That bought Pike some time, perhaps a few weeks. Enough to help Abigail with her situation, and then what? Send her away for her own safety? The thought created an unexpected hollowness in his chest. In just a few short weeks, Abigail Foster had become important to him in ways he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Her determination, her quiet strength, the way she faced each new challenge without complaint, all of it had worked its way under his skin, past defenses he'd thought impenetrable. As Pike rode back to the ranch, he resolved to focus on Abigail's problem first. Help her get the justice she deserved, then worry about Terrell when the time came, one ghost at a time. But as the ranch came into view, Abigail waiting on the porch with a welcoming smile that warmed something long cold inside him, Pike knew the decision wouldn't be that simple. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. Someone who mattered, and that made him vulnerable in ways that terrified him far more than any gunslinger's threat. Summer stretched into early fall, the days growing shorter as Abigail and Pike worked side by side on both the ranch and the plan to expose Alina's deception. The replies to Pike's telegrams had been encouraging. His contacts were discreetly gathering information, building a picture of Henry Wilcox's banking practices and Alina's history. Most promising was the response from Martha, who had smuggled out several of Abigail's genuine letters and journal entries, writing samples that could be compared to the forged letters Alina had used to destroy her sister's reputation. As they worked, something else grew between them, something neither was willing to name but both increasingly relied upon: trust, understanding, a connection that transcended their shared desire for justice. Abigail found herself watching Pike when he wasn't aware, the careful precision of his movements, the rare smile that transformed his face, the gentleness he showed to injured animals and exhausted ranch hands alike. Pike, too, found his gaze drawn to Abigail more often than he cared to admit. The way sunlight caught in her honey-blonde hair as she worked in the garden, the determined set of her jaw when she mastered a new skill. The intelligence in her eyes when they discussed the evidence they were gathering. One evening in early October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and purples, Pike handed Abigail a letter that had arrived that morning. "From the handwriting expert in Santa Fe," he explained. "He's compared the samples Martha sent with the copies of the forgeries the marshal obtained." Abigail opened the letter with trembling hands, reading quickly. "He says they're definitely forgeries," she breathed, "that the handwriting shows clear signs of imitation rather than natural flow." She looked up at Pike, hope brightening her eyes. "This is evidence, Pike." "Real evidence." Pike nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "The marshal in Prescott has been investigating Henry's banking practices too. Seems your former fiancé has been manipulating accounts, extending loans to friends at favorable rates while denying them to others." "That doesn't surprise me," Abigail said. "Henry always believed rules applied to everyone but himself." She set the letter aside. "How much more do we need before we can act?" "The newspaper editor wants one more piece," Pike said. "Proof that Alina has done this before. You mentioned a school friend." Abigail nodded. "Rebecca Thornton. She was engaged to a wealthy Boston merchant when Alina visited her family. Within weeks, the engagement was broken and Rebecca's reputation was in tatters. She eventually moved to California, I believe." "My contact at the Pinkerton agency is trying to locate her," Pike said. "If she'll provide a statement about what happened, then we'll have everything we need." Abigail's voice caught. "I can't believe we've come this far. When I first arrived on your doorstep, I thought that I'd shoot your sister and be done with it," Pike finished with a wry smile. Abigail laughed softly. "Something like that. Instead, you've shown me a better way." Her expression grew serious. "Thank you, Pike, not just for helping me but for everything." The sincerity in her voice made something in Pike's chest tighten. He was about to respond when the sound of approaching riders drew his attention. Immediately on alert, he stood, one hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Stay here," he said quietly, moving to the edge of the porch. 3 riders approached in the gathering dusk, their silhouettes unfamiliar. Pike motioned for Abigail to go inside, then stepped into the yard to meet them. "That's far enough," he called when they were within earshot. "State your business." The lead rider, a tall man with a weathered face, raised his hands to show he was peaceful. "Mr. Zander, name's Cooper, Jim Cooper. This is my wife Sarah and our son Daniel. We're looking for passage to Silver Creek, but our wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back. The boy at the general store in town said you might be willing to help." Pike studied them carefully, looking for any sign of deception. The man appeared genuine, exhausted and trail-worn, with the calloused hands of someone who worked for a living. The woman beside him had the weary but determined look of a frontier wife who had seen her share of hardships. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. "Where are you coming from?" Pike asked, still wary. "Kansas," Cooper replied. "Drought took our farm, heard there was work out this way." Pike relaxed slightly. "You can stay the night. I'll send Liam out to help with your wagon in the morning." Relief washed over Cooper's face. "Much obliged, Mr. Zander, we won't be any trouble." Abigail had emerged from the house despite Pike's instructions. "Come inside," she called to the family. I have stew on the stove and you look like you could use a hot meal." As the Coopers dismounted, gratitude evident in their weary faces, Pike gave Abigail a pointed look. "We need to talk about your habit of ignoring my directions when there's potential danger," he murmured. "They're a family with a child, Pike," she whispered back, "hardly dangerous outlaws." "You can't always tell by looking," he warned, but followed her inside where she was already bustling about the kitchen, setting extra places at the table. The evening that followed was unlike any Pike had experienced in his solitary existence. The small ranch house filled with conversation, with the boy Daniel's excited questions about ranch life, with Sarah Cooper's sincere thanks for their hospitality. Abigail moved through it all with natural grace, making their unexpected guests feel welcome while managing to keep food coming and conversation flowing. Pike found himself watching her, struck by how different his home felt with her in it. How different his life had become. For years he had existed in a state of perpetual vigilance, keeping everyone at arm's length, trusting no one. Now his table held strangers, his ranch employed men who looked to him for leadership, and a woman who had arrived on his doorstep seeking vengeance had somehow transformed into someone essential to his daily existence. Later, after the Coopers had been settled in the spare room and on pallets in the main room, Pike found Abigail standing alone on the back porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "They seem like good people," she said as he joined her. "Starting over like so many out here." Pike nodded. "Cooper mentioned he has carpentry skills. I might recommend him to Mills. The sheriff's been wanting to expand the jail." Abigail smiled. "That's kind of you." "Practical," Pike corrected. "The town needs skilled workers." "It was still kind," she insisted. "You pretend to be hard and unfeeling, Pike Xander, but I've seen the truth. You care more than you let on." Her words struck uncomfortably close to the mark. Pike changed the subject. "I received another telegram today from a contact up north. Wade Terrell has been asking questions about me in Colorado." Abigail's smile faded. "The man connected to Dawson, you think he's coming here?" Eventually, Pike kept his voice level, not wanting to alarm her, "But we have time. Enough to finish what we've started with your sister." Abigail studied his face in the moonlight. "What will you do when he comes?" Pike had asked himself the same question countless times over the past weeks. The old answer would have been simple. Prepare for the confrontation, kill or be killed. But now, with Abigail in his life, with the fragile beginnings of something worth protecting, the calculus had changed. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I won't let him harm anyone here." Abigail's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool against his palm. "We'll face it together, whatever comes." The simple declaration, "we together," sent an unexpected warmth through Pike's chest. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had offered to stand with him against trouble, couldn't remember the last time he would have allowed it if they had. "Abigail," he began, not sure what he wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. She turned to face him, her blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "Yes." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with unspoken possibilities. Pike found himself moving closer, drawn by something more powerful than caution. Abigail's lips parted slightly, her gaze holding his without fear or uncertainty. Just as Pike leaned forward, the back door creaked open. They stepped apart quickly, the moment shattered. "Sorry to interrupt," Jim Cooper said, looking embarrassed. "Just wanted to ask where I might find water for the night." "I'll show you," Abigail said quickly, her cheeks flushed. "There's a pump in the kitchen." As she led Cooper back inside, Pike remained on the porch, his heart racing with the realization of what had nearly happened, and the even more startling realization of how much he had wanted it to happen. For 5 years he had lived by one rule above all others: never get close enough to anyone that losing them would matter. Yet here he was, on the precipice of breaking that rule in the most fundamental way possible. And the most terrifying truth of all was that he wasn't sure he wanted to step back. The next morning brought unexpected news. As Liam and Jim Cooper prepared to set out to repair the broken wagon, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop, the same young man who had delivered the message about Dawson weeks earlier. "Sheriff sent me, Mr. Xander," he called, reining in his lathered horse. "Telegram came for Miss Foster, said it was urgent." Abigail emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "For me." The messenger nodded, handing her a sealed envelope. "Yes, ma'am," from Prescott. Abigail broke the seal with trembling fingers, reading quickly. Her face paled. "It's from Martha," she said, looking up at Pike. "Eleanor is coming to Silver Creek. She and Henry will arrive on tomorrow's stage." Pike frowned. Why would they come here? "Martha says Henry is investigating a banking opportunity in the area." Abigail's voice shook slightly. "But that's not all. Eleanor has been telling people she's coming to rescue me from a man of questionable character who has been keeping me against my will." "Rescue you?" Pike echoed incredulously. "From me." "She's turning my situation to her advantage," Abigail said, anger replacing shock, "making herself seem the concerned, loving sister while painting you as some kind of villain who abducted me." Pike's mind raced, assessing this unexpected development. "This changes our timeline. We need to move now before they arrive and start spreading their version of events around town." "But we're still waiting for information about Rebecca," Abigail protested. "Without that final piece." "We'll work with what we have," Pike decided. "Ride into town today, wire the newspaper editor in Santa Fe, tell him to send what he's prepared so far to the Silver Creek Sentinel." "Joseph Bailey runs the Sentinel," Liam volunteered. "Honest man but cautious. He won't print anything that might get him sued without solid evidence." Pike nodded. "Then we'll give him evidence. The handwriting expert's report, the marshal's findings on Henry's banking practices. It's enough to raise serious questions, even without Rebecca's statement." "And when Eleanor and Henry arrive tomorrow," Abigail asked. A grim smile touched Pike's lips. "We'll be waiting for them with the sheriff and Mr. Bailey both present to hear their explanation for these concerning reports that have just come to light." As plans were made and tasks assigned, Sarah Cooper approached Abigail. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said apologetically. "This sister of yours, she sounds like a real piece of work." Abigail smiled sadly. "She is. I never understood why she hated me so much. We had the same advantages, the same upbringing, yet she spent her life trying to take whatever I have." Sarah laid a comforting hand on Abigail's arm. "Some people are just built that way, honey, empty inside. They think taking from others will fill them up, but it never does." She glanced at her husband and son preparing to leave with Liam. "The good news is there are far more decent folks in this world than bad ones. You just have to find them." "I think I already have," Abigail said softly, her gaze finding Pike across the yard. Sarah followed her gaze, a knowing smile touching her lips. "I see that. He's a good man, your Mr. Xander, rough around the edges maybe, but true where it counts." "He's not my Mr. Xander," Abigail protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Not yet," Sarah replied with a wink, "but I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. And I've seen how you look at him too." Before Abigail could respond, Pike approached, his expression serious. "We need to ride into town now if we're going to set everything in motion before the stage arrives tomorrow." Sarah squeezed Abigail's hand. "Go on, Jim and I will watch over things here until you return." As Abigail and Pike rode toward Silver Creek, the vast landscape spread out before them like a canvas painted in autumn hues. Abigail found herself stealing glances at Pike's profile, strong and determined against the clear blue sky. Sarah's words echoed in her mind, unsettling yet thrilling. Was it possible that Pike saw her as more than just someone to help, more than a temporary presence in his life? And what of her own feelings, which had grown from gratitude to something deeper, something that made her heart race when he was near and ache when he was absent? "You're quiet," Pike observed as they rode. "I'm thinking about tomorrow," Abigail half-lied. "About facing Eleanor after all this time." Pike's expression softened slightly. "You don't have to go through with this. We could send the evidence to the authorities in Prescott, let them handle it." "No," Abigail said firmly. "I need to face her. I need to see the look in her eyes when she realizes her lies have been exposed. Even if it means confronting painful memories, reliving the betrayal." Abigail considered this. Perhaps that's necessary. "To truly move forward, I need to close this chapter completely." Pike nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Just remember, you won't be facing her alone." The simple promise warmed Abigail more than she could express. No matter what happened tomorrow, she would have Pike beside her, steady and unflinching in his support. It was more than she had dared hope for when she first arrived on his doorstep, a desperate woman seeking vengeance. Now, riding beside him toward an uncertain confrontation, Abigail realized that Pike Xander had given her something far more valuable than help with her revenge. He had given her a place to belong, a purpose beyond her pain, and perhaps, though she scarcely dared to acknowledge it, the beginnings of something that might heal them both. Silver Creek bustled with unusual activity as the weekly stage prepared to arrive. Word had spread quickly about the impending confrontation, fueled by the startling article Joseph Bailey had published that morning in the Sentinel's special edition. Questions surround Prescott banker and wife. Evidence suggests pattern of deception and financial impropriety. The article carefully laid out the findings of the handwriting expert and the marshal's investigation, stopping short of direct accusations but raising enough concerns to have the town buzzing with speculation. That the subjects of the article were arriving on today's stage only added to the excitement. Pike and Abigail waited on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, where Mills had agreed to host the initial meeting. Joseph Bailey stood nearby, notebook in hand, eager to document whatever transpired. A small crowd had gathered, sensing drama in the making. "Are you ready for this?" Pike asked quietly, noting the tension in Abigail's posture. She nodded, her honey blonde hair neatly arranged, her blue calico dress the most formal clothing she'd worn since arriving at the ranch. "As ready as I'll ever be." The distant sound of the stagecoach announced its approach. Pike placed a reassuring hand on Abigail's back, feeling her take a deep breath beneath his palm. "Remember," he murmured, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." The stage rolled into town in a cloud of dust, coming to a stop before the hotel. The door opened, and a well-dressed man in his 30s descended first, Henry Wilcox, Pike presumed. He turned to assist a stylish woman whose resemblance to Abigail was striking despite her darker blonde hair and more calculating expression. Abigail Foster Wilcox surveyed the town with barely disguised disdain before her gaze landed on Abigail. Shock registered briefly before her features composed themselves into a mask of concern. "Abigail," she called, moving forward with arms outstretched. "Thank heavens we've found you at last. We've been so worried." Abigail didn't move to meet her sister's embrace. "Have you, Abigail? How considerate, given that you're the reason I left Prescott in the first place." Abigail faltered, her performance momentarily disrupted by Abigail's cool response. Henry stepped forward, his expression stern. "Abigail, your behavior has caused your sister great distress. We've come to bring you home where you belong." "I think we should continue this conversation inside," Sheriff Mills interjected, gesturing to his office. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox, I'm Sheriff Mills. There are some matters we need to discuss." Abigail's gaze shifted to Pike, who stood silently beside Abigail. "Who is this man?" she demanded. "Is he the one who's been keeping you here?" "This is Pike Xander," Abigail said calmly. "My employer and friend." A fleeting smile touched her lips. "And no, Abigail, no one keeps me anywhere against my will, not anymore." The pointed words clearly struck home. Abigail's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger breaking through her concerned facade. "I see he's poisoned your mind against your own family." "Please," Mills said more firmly, "inside." Now. The tense group moved into the sheriff's office, where Mills directed them to chairs arranged around his desk. Joseph Bailey followed, taking a seat in the corner with his notebook ready. Pike positioned himself behind Abigail's chair, a silent but unmistakable presence of support. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox," Mills began, "I assume you've seen today's edition of the Sentinel." Henry's jaw tightened. "That libelous trash." "Yes, we saw it upon our arrival. Rest assured, Sheriff, my attorneys will be addressing it promptly." "Before you involve attorneys," Mills said, "you might want to consider the evidence Mr. Bailey based his article on." He opened a folder on his desk. "We have a report from a respected handwriting expert indicating that letters allegedly written by Miss Foster were, in fact, forgeries." Abigail's composure slipped again, her fingers clutching her handbag more tightly. "That's ridiculous. What expert? Where?" "A Mr. Davis of Santa Fe," Mills replied, "formerly employed by the Treasury Department to detect counterfeit currency. His credentials are impeccable." "And we have information about your banking practices, Henry," Abigail added, her voice steady despite the emotion Pike could sense beneath it. "Irregular loans, preferential treatment for friends, denial of credit to those who opposed you politically." Henry's face flushed with anger. "How dare you make such accusations?" "I am a respected businessman." "A businessman under investigation by the Territorial Banking Commission," Mills corrected, "based on evidence provided by Marshal Reynolds in Prescott." "This is outrageous," Alina snapped, her concerned sister act abandoned. "We came here out of the goodness of our hearts to bring Abigail home, and this is how we're treated, with baseless accusations and ambushes." "Is it baseless, Alina?" Abigail asked softly. "Or is it simply the truth you never expected to face?" She leaned forward. "I know what you did, how you forged those letters, spread those rumors, how you've done it before to Rebecca Thornton in Boston." Alina paled visibly at Rebecca's name. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Pike spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Because we received a telegram this morning from Miss Thornton. She's provided a sworn statement about how you destroyed her engagement and reputation 5 years ago, using the same methods you employed against your sister." This was a calculated risk. They hadn't actually received such a telegram, though Pike's Pinkerton contact had located Rebecca and was in the process of obtaining her statement. But Pike had learned long ago that sometimes the anticipation of evidence was as effective as the evidence itself, especially when dealing with guilty consciences. The gambit worked. Alina's composure cracked entirely, her face contorting with rage as she turned on her sister. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? Perfect Abigail with her books and her manners and father's approval. You had everything, handed to you while I had to fight for every scrap of attention." "Alina," Henry warned, placing a restraining hand on her arm. She shook him off. "No, I won't be quiet anymore." "She deserves to know." Alina's gaze burned into Abigail. "I didn't just want Henry. I wanted to see you broken, humiliated, cast out the way I always felt cast out in your shadow." The raw hatred in Alina's voice stunned the room into silence. Abigail sat very still, her face pale but composed. "I never cast a shadow over you, Alina," she said finally. "That was all in your mind. I loved you. You were my sister." "Love," Alina spat the word like poison. "What good is love without power, without position? I have those things now. I took them from you, and I would do it again." Henry stood abruptly. "That's enough. We're leaving. This entire proceeding is irregular and without legal merit." He reached for Alina's arm. "Come, my dear. We'll address these slanderous claims through proper channels." But the damage was done. Alina's outburst had confirmed everything, and Joseph Bailey's pencil had captured every damning word. Even Henry seemed to realize it, his confident demeanor crumbling as he glanced at the newspaperman's furious scribbling. "One moment, Mr. Wilcox," Sheriff Mills said. "There's the matter of potential fraud and false statements to consider. I can't allow you to leave town just yet." "You can't hold us," Henry blustered. "We've committed no crime in your jurisdiction." "Perhaps not," Mills conceded. "But I've received a wire from Marshal Reynolds requesting that I detain you until he arrives tomorrow to discuss certain banking irregularities that cross territorial lines. So I'm afraid you'll be enjoying Silver Creek's hospitality for at least another day." As Henry continued to protest, Pike touched Abigail's shoulder lightly. "Let's step outside," he murmured. "You've heard what you needed to hear." Abigail nodded, rising with dignity despite the emotional storm she must have been weathering. As they moved toward the door, Alina called after her. "This changes nothing, Abigail. When we return to Prescott, who do you think people will believe? The respected wife of the town's leading banker, or a woman who ran off to live with a known gunslinger?" Abigail paused, turning back to her sister with unexpected serenity. "I don't care who they believe anymore, Alina. I know the truth. So do you, and now so does everyone who matters." She glanced at Bailey, who nodded in confirmation. "Your words today will reach Prescott before you do, your own confession printed for all to read." With that, she walked out into the sunlight, Pike close behind her. Once outside, away from the curious onlookers who had gathered, Abigail finally allowed herself to tremble. Pike guided her to a quiet spot behind the sheriff's office where she leaned against the wall, drawing deep breaths. "You did it," Pike said softly. "You got the confession no one thought was possible." Abigail looked up at him, tears shimmering in her blue eyes. "We did it. I couldn't have faced them without knowing you were there." She shook her head in wonder. "All these years I never truly understood the depth of her hatred. How can someone carry such poison inside them?" Pike had no answer for that. He'd seen enough of humanity's darkness to know that some hearts harbored malice beyond reason or remedy. Instead of speaking, he simply took Abigail's hand, offering the silent comfort of his presence. "What happens now?" she asked after a moment. "Now we ride back to the ranch," Pike said. "Mills will handle Henry and Alina. The marshal will arrive tomorrow with formal charges related to the banking irregularities. Bailey's article will ensure that everyone knows what really happened between you and your sister." And then? The question hung between them, loaded with implications Pike wasn't sure he was ready to address. What came next for Abigail now that her quest for justice was essentially complete? Would she stay at the ranch, continue working alongside him? Or would she move on, perhaps to one of the larger towns where a woman of her education and abilities would be valued? And what did he want her to do? The answer to that question frightened Pike more than any gunfight ever had. "One day at a time," he said finally. "Let's get through today first." Abigail nodded, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "You're right, today is enough for now." As they walked toward their horses, Abigail suddenly stopped, turning to face Pike with unexpected determination. "There's something I need to say to you, Pike, something I've been thinking about for a while now." Pike felt his heart rate quicken at her serious expression. "What is it?" "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for helping me expose Alina, but for everything else. For giving me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go, for teaching me to be strong in new ways. For showing me that justice doesn't have to come at the cost of my own integrity." Relief mixed with an odd disappointment in Pike's chest. He wasn't sure what he'd been expecting, or hoping, she might say, but her gratitude, though genuine, felt somehow insufficient for the moment. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've more than earned your keep at the ranch, and as for the rest," he shrugged uncomfortably, "I understand what it's like to need closure." Abigail studied his face, something unspoken in her eyes. For a moment, Pike thought she might say more, might give voice to whatever was creating that current of tension between them. Instead, she simply nodded and turned toward her horse. As they rode out of town, Pike wondered if he had just missed something important, a door opening briefly before closing again. The thought troubled him more than it should have, given his long-standing commitment to emotional distance. But then, Abigail Foster had been troubling his carefully constructed isolation from the moment she appeared on his doorstep. And despite all his efforts to maintain the walls around his heart, Pike was beginning to suspect that those walls had already been breached beyond repair. The ride back to the ranch passed in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts after the emotional confrontation in town. As they approached the ranch house, they saw Jim Cooper working on the porch railing that Pike had been meaning to repair for weeks. "Looks like Cooper's making himself useful," Pike observed. Abigail smiled. "Sarah mentioned he was looking for ways to repay your hospitality. She's been helping me with the garden while you were dealing with the cattle yesterday." Pike nodded, oddly pleased by the thought of his isolated ranch becoming a place of industry and purpose. For so long, it had been merely a hiding place, a defensive position. Now, with Abigail's influence, it was transforming into something closer to a home. As they dismounted, Sarah emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are, how did it go in town?" "Better than expected," Abigail replied. "Alina revealed her true feelings for all to hear. The newspaper will print everything." Sarah embraced her warmly. "Good for you, honey. Standing up to family is the hardest thing in the world." Jim came down from the porch, nodding respectfully to Pike. "Hope you don't mind the repairs, Mr. Xander. Seemed the least I could do." "It's good work," Pike acknowledged, examining the solid craftsmanship. "You have skill with wood." Cooper smiled modestly. Always had a knack for it. Before I tried farming, I apprenticed to a carpenter back east. Our wagon should be ready by tomorrow, Sarah added. Liam and Daniel went to finish the repairs this afternoon. Pike glanced at Abigail, an idea forming. Actually, if you're interested in staying in the area, Cooper, I might have a proposition for you. Jim's eyes lit with cautious hope. What kind of proposition? The north section of my property has good timber and a creek with enough flow to power a small sawmill. I've been thinking of building one, selling lumber to Silver Creek and the surrounding ranches. Pike gestured toward the horizon. With the railroad pushing this way, there'll be demand for quality lumber. Could be a profitable venture for someone with the right skills. You're offering me a job? Cooper asked, surprise evident in his voice. More like a partnership, Pike clarified. You manage the mill operation, I provide the land and initial investment. We split the profits. You and your family could build a place up by the creek. Jim looked at Sarah, wordless communication passing between them. That's mighty generous, Mr. Xander. Why would you offer such a thing to people you barely know? Pike considered the question, surprised by his own impulse toward trust after years of suspicion. Good people are hard to find out here, he said finally, and I've learned recently that a man needs more than isolation to build something worthwhile. His gaze strayed to Abigail as he spoke, finding her watching him with a soft expression that made his chest tighten strangely. We'd be honored to accept, Jim said, extending his hand to Pike, and grateful for the opportunity. As they shook on the arrangement, Pike experienced an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. He was putting down roots, forming connections, creating something that might outlast him. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. That evening, after the Coopers had retired to the spare room that would be theirs until their own cabin could be built, Pike found Abigail on the back porch, much as he had that night when they'd almost kissed. The memory of that interrupted moment had haunted him more than he cared to admit. That was a wonderful thing you did today, she said as he joined her, leaning against the porch railing, offering the Coopers a new start. Pike shrugged. It makes good business sense. Cooper knows timber, and I could use the income from a mill. It's more than that, Abigail said, seeing through his practical explanation. You're building something here, Pike, a community. A future. The observation struck uncomfortably close to truths Pike wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. Maybe, he conceded, or maybe I'm just tired of fixing that damn porch railing myself. Abigail laughed, the sound like music in the quiet night. Always deflecting compliments with humor. One of these days, Pike Xander, you're going to have to admit you're a good man at heart. Don't spread that around, he warned with mock seriousness. Bad for my reputation. They fell into companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky above. After a while, Pike spoke again, voicing the question that had been weighing on him since their confrontation with a leaner. What will you do now that you've gotten what you came for? Abigail turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. I'm not sure the justice we achieved today was what I originally came for. When I first arrived on your doorstep, I wanted revenge. I wanted a leaner to suffer as I had suffered. And now I realize that exposing the truth was what I truly needed. Not to hurt a leaner, but to free myself from the power her lies held over me, she smiled softly. As for what I'll do next, I've grown fond of this place, of the work we're doing here, of the life we're building. Way. The word hung between them, filled with possibility. You could stay, Pike said, the words emerging before he could reconsider them. The ranch needs someone with your skills. The books are in better order than they've ever been, the garden's flourishing. Even Liam smiles more these days. Are those the only reasons you want me to stay? Abigail asked quietly, her blue eyes searching his face. The moment of truth had arrived, unavoidable and terrifying. Pike could retreat as he always had, hide behind practicality and distance. Or he could take the most frightening risk of his life, more frightening than any gunfight or manhunt, and admit what he had been fighting against since the day Abigail Foster walked into his life. No, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel, let alone express. Those aren't the only reasons. Abigail moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used. What are the other reasons, Pike? "You know what they are," he said, his heart hammering in his chest. "You make this place feel like home. You make me remember what it's like to care about something more than just surviving day to day. You make me want things I gave up on years ago." "What things?" she whispered, though the look in her eyes told him she already knew the answer. Instead of speaking, Pike closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to cup her cheek as he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he expected her to pull away. But Abigail responded with a sweetness that stole his breath, her hand coming to rest on his chest, just above his racing heart. When they finally parted, Pike rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the intensity of feeling coursing through him. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, caring about people, letting them close. "It's been a long time." "I know," Abigail said softly. "I'm not much better at it. Trust doesn't come easily to either of us anymore." She smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "But perhaps that's why we understand each other so well. We know the cost of betrayal. We value truth all the more for having lost it once." Pike tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear, marveling at how natural it felt to touch her this way. "I can't promise it will be easy. I have enemies. Terrell is still out there somewhere, and there may be others. My past has a way of finding me. And I have a ruined reputation in Prescott and a sister who will likely never forgive me for exposing her." Abigail's smile turned wry. "Perhaps we're perfect for each other after all, two damaged people trying to build something whole from the pieces." The sentiment struck Pike with unexpected force. For years he had believed his capacity for connection, for love, had been destroyed along with his trust in humanity. Yet here was this remarkable woman offering him a chance to reconstruct what he had thought permanently broken. "Stay," he said again, the word carrying the weight of all he couldn't yet express. "Not as my employee. Not as someone passing through. Stay because you want to, because we might have something worth building together." "Yes," Abigail answered simply, "I'll stay." As Pike pulled her into his arms again, the kiss deeper and more certain this time, he felt a sensation he had almost forgotten. Hope, spreading its fragile wings in a heart long closed to its possibility. Whatever came next, Terrell, Aliner's continued machinations, or simply the daily challenges of frontier life, they would face it together. And for the first time in 5 long years, Pike Xander didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The weeks that followed brought changes to the ranch and to the tentative relationship growing between Pike and Abigail. With the Coopers established in a temporary cabin near the proposed sawmill site, the property hummed with productive activity. Jim began marking trees and designing the mill, while Sarah proved to be an invaluable friend to Abigail, offering companionship and practical advice about frontier life. Word from Silver Creek confirmed that Aliner and Henry had departed under escort from Marshall Reynolds, facing charges related to banking fraud back in Prescott. Joseph Bailey's newspaper had published Aliner's full confession, ensuring that Abigail's name was cleared not only in Silver Creek but throughout the territory. Letters began arriving from Prescott, former friends expressing support and apologizing for believing the lies. Abigail read them with a detached interest, no longer defined by the approval or disapproval of the society she had left behind. "Martha writes that people are talking about Aliner and Henry's arrest," she told Pike one evening as they sat by the fire. "Apparently, several of Henry's banking clients have come forward with similar stories of manipulation and threats." Pike looked up from the book he was reading. "Are you satisfied with how things turned out?" Abigail considered the question. "I am, not because they're suffering, though I can't pretend I'm sorry about that, but because the truth is known. My father always said that truth has a weight that lies can never match, no matter how elaborate." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Abigail smiled at the memory. "He would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and directness above social graces." "High praise," Pike said with a small smile. "Though I'm not sure I'd have passed muster as a suitor in Prescott society, wise father or not." The word suitor hung in the air between them, acknowledging the shift in their relationship that had been evolving since their kiss on the porch. They had been careful, taking things slowly, both conscious of the scrutiny that came with small-town life. But private moments, hands touching over breakfast, stolen kisses in the barn, conversations that stretched late into the night, had been growing more frequent and more meaningful. "You might be surprised," Abigail said, setting aside her letters. "Father believed character mattered more than social position, and you, Pike Xander, for all your attempts to convince the world otherwise, have character in abundance." Pike's expression turned serious. "I've done things, Abigail, things I'm not proud of. The reputation I have, it's not entirely undeserved." "I know who you are," she said simply. "I've seen you at your most dangerous and your most gentle. I've watched you risk your life for strangers and offer second chances to people society has written off. Whatever you've done, it doesn't change what I see when I look at you now." The acceptance in her voice humbled Pike in ways he couldn't articulate. He set aside his book and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," he said. "With the sawmill starting up and the Coopers settled, I've been thinking about making some changes to the ranch house." Abigail looked around the simple space that had become home to her. "What kind of changes?" "Expansions mainly, another bedroom or two, a proper dining room, maybe a study for your books." Pike hesitated, then continued more carefully. "I thought you might have ideas about how it should look. Since it would be your home too, officially." Abigail's eyes widened as his meaning became clear. "Pike, are you asking?" "Not very well, apparently," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "What I'm trying to say, Abigail Foster, is that I love you. These past months with you have shown me what my life was missing, what I was missing, trying to outrun my past instead of building a future." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, sharing this life, this ranch, whatever comes next." Tears glistened in Abigail's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would consider that very much." Pike pulled her into his arms, still amazed that this remarkable woman had found her way to him, had chosen him despite knowing the darkness in his past. As he held her, feeling her heart beat against his chest, he made a silent vow to spend the rest of his life being worthy of the trust she had placed in him. "There's something else," he said when they finally separated. "Something I've been putting off dealing with." Abigail's expression grew concerned. "Terrell." Pike nodded. "My contacts say he's still asking questions, still tracking me. It's only a matter of time before he finds Silver Creek." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about how to handle it. The old me would have waited for him to make his move, then dealt with him the same way I dealt with Dawson." "And the new you?" Abigail asked softly. "The new me has more to lose." "More to protect." Pike met her gaze directly. "I'm thinking of reaching out to Marshal Reynolds, explaining the situation, offering to help bring Terrell in alive if possible." Abigail's face reflected understanding of what this decision meant for Pike, a final step away from the solitary gunslinger he had been, toward integration with the law and society he had avoided for so long. "I think that's wise," she said. "Not just safer but healthier, a way to close that chapter without adding more violence to your conscience." Pike nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I'll wire Reynolds tomorrow. Until then, we'll need to be careful, extra vigilant around the ranch." "We will be," Abigail assured him, "together." Later that night, as Pike made his usual rounds of the property before turning in, he found himself looking at his ranch with new eyes. What had once been merely a hideaway, a temporary refuge from his past, now represented a future filled with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. A home, a family, a life built on something other than survival and vengeance. The night air carried the scent of pine from the north section where the sawmill was taking shape, mingled with the earthy aroma of Abigail's garden. In the distance he could see the lantern light from the Cooper's cabin, a reminder that he was no longer alone in this vast wilderness. As he turned back toward the house where Abigail waited, Pike realized that the man who had once called himself the Ghost, empty, solitary, haunting the borderlands between life and death, was finally at peace. Not because his enemies were vanquished or his past erased, but because he had found something worth living for beyond the shadow of what had been lost. The future stretched before him, uncertain but filled with promise. Whatever came next, he would face it not as a ghost, but as a man fully present in his own life. a man who had learned, against all odds and expectations, that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, truth, and love. 2 days later, Pike's telegram to Marshal Reynolds had been sent and acknowledged. The lawman promised to arrive within the week to discuss a strategy for dealing with Terrell. Until then, precautions were in place, Liam and the other ranch hands taking turns keeping watch, the Coopers warned to stay alert for strangers approaching their cabin. Despite the undercurrent of tension, life at the ranch continued with a new sweetness. News of Pike and Abigail's engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek, bringing a surprising outpouring of goodwill from the townsfolk. Sheriff Mills rode out personally to offer congratulations, bringing with him Joseph Bailey, who proposed a small article in the Sentinel to announce the upcoming nuptials. "Folks in town have taken a shine to your story," Bailey explained as they sat around the kitchen table. "The Eastern lady seeking justice and the reformed gunslinger finding redemption through love. It's the kind of tale that gives people hope." Pike looked uncomfortable with this romanticized version of events. "I'm not sure reformed is the right word." "Call it what you will," Mills interjected, "but you've changed since Miss Foster arrived, Xander. Anyone with eyes can see it." The sheriff smiled at Abigail. "The whole town's better for it, too. That sawmill you're building with Cooper will bring jobs, growth. Silver Creek needs more men putting down stakes, fewer passing through with trouble on their heels." After their visitors departed, Pike and Abigail walked to the corral where a new colt frolicked on spindly legs, its mother watching protectively nearby. "Does it bother you," Abigail asked, "the way people talk about us?" Pike leaned against the fence rail, considering. "Not as much as it would have once, though I'm not sure I recognize myself in Bailey's romantic redemption story." "No," Abigail smiled, moving to stand beside him. "The dangerous gunslinger with a heart of gold tamed by love, it has a certain appeal." Pike snorted. "Hardly. If anyone's shown strength in this story, it's you, coming west alone, starting over, facing down your sister." He reached for her hand. "I'm the one who's been changed by knowing you, Abigail, not the other way around." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Pike tensed, hand moving instinctively toward his gun, but relaxed when he recognized the rider as one of the hands from the north section. "Mr. Xander," the young man called, reining in his lathered horse. "Riders coming, 6, maybe 7, armed and moving fast toward the mill site." Pike's expression hardened. "Terrell," he said to Abigail. "Sooner than expected." "What do we do?" Abigail asked, fear evident in her voice but determination in her stance. "You stay here," Pike said, already moving toward the house. "Liam and Jacob will watch over you. I'll ride to the mill, make sure the Coopers are safe." "I'm coming with you," Abigail insisted, following him. Pike turned, his expression brooking no argument. "No. I can't protect you and them at the same time. Please, Abigail, stay here where it's safer." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Abigail nodded reluctantly. "Be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks." "I won't," Pike promised, grabbing his rifle from its place by the door. "Remember what we discussed with Reynolds. If Terrell can be taken alive, it ends better for everyone. But if it comes down to him or you." "I have too much to live for now," Pike assured her. "I'll be back before nightfall." With a last look at the woman who had given him a reason to embrace life again, Pike mounted his horse and rode toward the north section, the ranch hand and Manuel following close behind. The sawmill site was an hour's ride away, too far for comfort with Terrell's men closing in. Pike pushed his horse harder, praying they would arrive in time. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the creek and the half-built sawmill, Pike's heart sank. Smoke rose from the direction of the Cooper's cabin and the sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. They were too late. "Circle around to the west," Pike instructed the others. "Stay low and assess the situation before engaging. We don't know how many men Terrell has with him." The men nodded grimly, splitting off as directed. Pike continued forward more cautiously, using the trees for cover as he approached the cabin. Through his spyglass, he could see Jim Cooper crouched behind a fallen log, exchanging fire with unseen assailants. The cabin's roof was ablaze, and there was no sign of Sarah or Daniel. Pike moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the pines. When he was within earshot of Cooper's position, he whistled softly, the signal they had established for emergencies. Jim's head turned slightly, acknowledging Pike's presence without giving away his location to the attackers. Another burst of gunfire peppered the log Cooper was using for cover. Pike counted the shots, identifying at least 3 different weapons. Shifting his position, he caught a glimpse of movement near a cluster of boulders about 50 yards from the cabin, 2 men with rifles, taking turns firing to keep Cooper pinned down. "Where are Sarah and Daniel?" Pike called softly when there was a lull in the shooting. "Creek bed," Cooper answered tersely, "sent them running when the shooting started." Relief washed through Pike. The creek bed offered good cover and led away from the confrontation toward thicker forest. If Sarah had kept her wits about her, she would have taken Daniel deeper into the trees, away from danger. "How many attackers?" Pike asked. "5 that I've seen, led by a tall man with a burn scar on his neck." Terrell, just as Pike had feared, but where were the others? The ranch hand had reported 6 or 7 riders. The missing men could be circling around, setting up a crossfire or worse, heading toward the main ranch, toward Abigail. The thought sent a chill through Pike. He needed to end this quickly, get back to the ranch to ensure Abigail's safety. But rushing in against unknown odds would only get him killed, helping no one. Carefully, Pike worked his way closer to the boulders where 2 of Terrell's men were positioned. From his new vantage point, he could see 3 more attackers spread out in a rough semicircle around the cabin, with Terrell himself directing them from behind a large pine. Pike lined up his rifle on the nearest man, then hesitated. Marshal Reynolds' words echoed in his mind. Bringing Terrell in alive would mean closure, a clean end to this chapter of his life. But with Abigail potentially in danger, did he have time for caution? Making his decision, Pike let out another whistle, this one directed at Manuel and the ranch hand, who had worked their way into position on the other side of the clearing. Then he squeezed the trigger. His shot caught the nearest outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him out from behind his cover. Before the man could recover, Pike fired again, this time disabling rather than killing. From across the clearing, Manuel and the ranch hand opened fire on the 2 men flanking Terrell, forcing them to duck for cover. The sudden attack from multiple directions created confusion among Terrell's men. Cooper seized the opportunity, laying down suppressing fire that pinned the remaining outlaws behind inadequate cover. "Terrell," Pike shouted, his voice carrying across the clearing, "it's Xander, the man you're looking for. Let Cooper go and face me directly." For a moment silence fell over the battlefield, then Terrell's voice responded, hard with hatred. "Xander, Dawson was my friend, my brother in all but blood. You're going to die today for what you did to him." "Dawson was a murderer and a thief," Pike called back. "He chose his path just like you've chosen yours, but it's not too late to end this without more bloodshed." Terrell's laugh held no humor. "Trying to talk your way out, Ghost, that's not the reputation that precedes you." "Reputations can change," Pike replied. "People can change. I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this alive, Terrell. Marshal Reynolds is on his way here. He knows about Dawson, about the robberies in Wyoming, about all of it." "Then I have nothing to lose by killing you first," Terrell snarled, "and maybe your woman too. My men should be reaching your ranch right about now." Ice flooded Pike's veins. Abigail, he'd suspected Terrell might have split his forces, but having it confirmed sent panic coursing through him. He needed to end this now, get back to the ranch before it was too late. "Last chance, Terrell," Pike warned, shifting position to get a clearer shot. "Surrender now or this ends the hard way." The answer came in the form of gunfire as Terrell and his remaining men opened up on Pike's position. Wood splinters flew as bullets thudded into the tree Pike was using for cover. He returned fire, moving quickly to avoid becoming an easy target. Across the clearing, Cooper made a break for better position, but one of Terrell's men spotted him. Pike watched in horror as the outlaw took aim at Cooper's unprotected back. Without thinking, Pike stood from cover and fired, his shot dropping the outlaw before he could pull the trigger, but the movement exposed Pike to Terrell's line of fire. White-hot pain lanced through Pike's side as a bullet found its mark. He fell back against the tree, pressing a hand to the wound and feeling warm blood seep between his fingers. Not fatal, but bad enough to slow him down. And in a gunfight, speed was often the difference between life and death. "Pike's hit," Cooper shouted to Manuel, "cover me." Manuel and the ranch hand laid down suppressing fire, while Cooper worked his way toward Pike's position. Bullets kicked up dirt and pine needles all around them as Terrell's men continued their assault. "How bad?" Cooper asked as he reached Pike's side. "I'll live," Pike grunted, "but I need to get back to the ranch." Terrell sent men after Abigail. Cooper's face hardened with resolve. "We'll finish this first, you're no good to Miss Foster bleeding out." Before Pike could argue, Cooper had torn a strip from his shirt and was binding the wound with practiced efficiency. "Army medic in the war," he explained briefly. "This'll hold for now, but you need proper tending." Pike nodded his thanks, mind racing with strategies to end the standoff quickly. "We need to flank them," he decided. "Draw their attention with frontal fire while one of us circles behind." "I'll go," Cooper volunteered. "I know these woods better than you do now." Pike wanted to refuse, to insist on taking the most dangerous position himself. But the blood soaking through Cooper's makeshift bandage told him the other man was right. In his current condition, Pike would be slower, less effective. "Be careful," Pike said instead. "Terrell won't hesitate to shoot you in the back." Cooper checked his pistol grimly. "Neither will I if it comes to that." With a nod to Manuel to continue providing covering fire, Cooper slipped away into the underbrush, working his way around to approach Terrell's position from behind. Pike forced himself to his feet, ignoring the pain that radiated from his wounded side. He needed to keep Terrell's attention focused forward, away from Cooper's flanking movement. "Your men are falling, Terrell," Pike called out, his voice strong despite the pain. "The marshal knows you're here. Even if you kill me, there's no escaping justice now." "Justice?" Terrell spat back. "What justice did Dawson get?" "What justice did any of us ever get in this godforsaken territory? The law protects men like you, Xander. Men who hide behind badges when it suits them, then act as judge, jury, and executioner when it doesn't." "Is that what Dawson told you?" Pike asked, genuine curiosity mingling with his tactical need to keep Terrell talking. "That I was hiding behind a badge when I killed his brother." "He told me enough," Terrell shouted. "How you hunted them down one by one, how his brother begged for his life before you gunned him cold." Pike shook his head, though Terrell couldn't see the gesture. "That's not how it happened. Your friend Dawson left out the part where his brother shot an unarmed rancher in the back, where he killed a 15-year-old boy for trying to protect his family's cattle." Silence fell for a moment. Then Terrell's voice came again, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. "You're lying, trying to save yourself." "Check my saddlebags when I'm dead," Pike replied evenly. "You'll find the warrant for Simon Dawson's arrest. For the murders of Thomas Perkins and his son Matthew, signed by a territorial judge and as legal as they come." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I was a deputy marshal then, Terrell, doing my job. Dawson and his brother were rustlers and killers. Whatever he told you about being wronged, it was a lie." From his position, Pike could see confusion spreading among Terrell's remaining men. They exchanged glances, their resolve visibly weakening as doubt crept in. One of them called to Terrell. "Is that true, Wade? Was Dawson lying to us?" "Shut up," Terrell snarled. "Xander's the liar here. He'll say anything to save his skin." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Pike saw his opportunity and pressed on. "You've been used, Terrell. Dawson manipulated you, just like he manipulated everyone else. Ask yourself, why would a former lawman gun down innocent men for no reason? What would I have to gain?" The tension in the clearing was palpable. Pike could sense the wavering loyalty of Terrell's men, could almost feel the moment approaching when the balance would tip. He just needed to keep them talking a little longer, give Cooper time to get into position. "The men with you now," Pike continued, "they have a chance to walk away from this, to testify against you in exchange for leniency. Is dying for Dawson's lies worth it to them? Are you sure they won't take the deal?" This calculated statement had the intended effect. Terrell's men exchanged nervous glances, trust fracturing between them. One of them, the youngest, barely out of his teens, lowered his gun slightly. "I didn't sign on for this, Wade," he said. "Fighting lawmen, shooting ranchers, this ain't what you promised." "Coward," Terrell spat. "After everything Dawson did for us." "What did he ever do except get us into trouble?" the young outlaw countered. I'm done, I'm putting down my gun. He stood slowly, hands raised. Don't shoot. I surrender. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Then Terrell's gun swung toward his own man, hatred twisting his features. No surrenders, no witnesses. Before Terrell could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from the trees behind him. Terrell staggered, dropping his pistol as blood blossomed on his shoulder. Cooper emerged from the underbrush, rifle aimed steadily at Terrell's chest. Next one goes through your heart, Cooper warned. On your knees, hands where I can see them. With their leader wounded and one of their own preparing to testify against them, the fight went out of Terrell's remaining men. They dropped their weapons one by one, hands raised in surrender. Pike approached cautiously, his own gun trained on Terrell despite the pain in his side. You're under arrest, Wade Terrell. For attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy, he looked around at the defeated outlaws. All of you are under arrest. Terrell glared up at Pike, defiance still burning in his eyes despite his wound. This isn't over, Xander. Not by a long shot. Yes, Pike said quietly, it is. With the immediate danger contained, Pike's thoughts returned to Abigail and the threat Terrell had mentioned. Manuel, stay here with Cooper. Keep these men secure until the sheriff can send deputies. He turned to the ranch hand. You're with me, we need to get back to the ranch now. Despite Cooper's protests that Pike's wound needed proper attention, Pike mounted his horse, grimacing with pain but determined. If Terrell had indeed sent men to the ranch, Abigail was in danger. Nothing, not bullets, not blood loss, nothing would keep him from her side. As they galloped back toward the main ranch, Pike prayed they weren't already too late. Abigail paced the ranch house anxiously, unable to settle to any task while Pike was facing danger. Liam and Jacob had secured the house as best they could, positioning themselves at windows with clear views of the approaches. He'll be fine, Miss Foster, Liam assured her, though his frequent glances toward the north betrayed his own concern. Mr. Xander's handled worse than Terrell's gang. Abigail nodded, trying to draw comfort from Liam's confidence. But the knowledge that Pike was wounded, that he faced determined enemies, gnawed at her like a physical pain. After everything they had overcome together, after finding in each other the healing their wounded hearts had needed, the thought of losing him now was unbearable. I should have gone with him, she murmured, more to herself than to Liam. Begging your pardon, miss, but that would have just given him one more person to worry about protecting. Liam's blunt assessment held no malice, only pragmatic frontier truth. Best thing you can do for him now is stay safe. Abigail knew he was right, but the waiting chafed against her nature. Since coming west, she had discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed, a capacity to face challenges directly rather than demurely accepting whatever fate dealt her. Passively waiting while Pike risked his life felt like a regression to the woman she had been before, not the woman she had become. A movement on the horizon caught Jacob's attention. Riders, he announced tensely, coming fast from the east. Not from the direction of the mill. Liam joined him at the window, rifle ready. 3 of them, don't recognize any as our hands. Abigail's heart raced, Terrell's men coming just as Pike had feared. She fought down panic, forcing herself to think clearly. What do we do? Get down to the root cellar, Liam instructed. Jacob and I will hold them off as long as we can. If they get past us, he hesitated. There's a shotgun down there, Jacob finished. And the back way out that Mr. Xander showed you, use it if you have to. Abigail shook her head firmly. I'm not hiding in the cellar while you risk your lives. I can shoot, she picked up the rifle Pike had taught her to use. I'll take the back bedroom window, it has the clearest view of the approach from the barn. Liam looked like he wanted to argue, but a glance at Abigail's determined face changed his mind. Mr. Xander won't like this, he warned. Mr. Xander isn't here, Abigail replied with more confidence than she felt. And I won't sit helplessly by while others fight for me, not anymore. With a reluctant nod, Liam accepted her decision. Stay low, don't expose yourself to fire, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Abigail positioned herself at the window as instructed, the rifle heavy but familiar in her hands. Through the glass, she could see the riders approaching at a gallop, dust rising behind them like a storm cloud. Fear knotted her stomach, but alongside it was a steely resolve. This was her home now, her future with Pike. She would defend it with everything she had. The riders reined in about 100 yards from the house, clearly assessing the situation before making their move. One of them pointed toward the barn and another nodded in agreement. Their plan seemed to be to use the outbuilding for cover as they approached the house. "They're splitting up," Jacob called from his position. "Two heading for the barn, one circling around back." "I see the one out back," Abigail confirmed, tracking the rider through her window as he disappeared behind the chicken coop. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The silence stretched thin and brittle like ice about to crack. Then a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wooden frame near Liam's window. "Here they come," he shouted, returning fire as two men darted from the barn toward the house, using water troughs and wagon parts for cover. Abigail focused on the back of the property, watching for the third man. When he finally broke cover, running in a crouch toward the rear door, she took aim just as Pike had taught her. "Breathe out slowly, squeeze the trigger gently, don't jerk." The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the man stumbled, clutching his leg. He wasn't dead. Abigail had aimed for his lower body deliberately, but he was down, no longer an immediate threat. The realization that she had just shot a man was strangely distant, a fact to be processed later when survival wasn't at stake. Gunfire intensified at the front of the house as the other two attackers pressed their advantage. Glass shattered as bullets found windows, and Liam grunted in pain, though he continued firing. "You hit," Jacob called anxiously. "Just grazed," Liam replied through gritted teeth. "Keep firing." Abigail moved to help him, but froze at the sound of splintering wood from the kitchen. The wounded man she had shot had managed to reach the back door and was trying to break in. Without hesitating, she swung her rifle toward the new threat, but before she could fire, the door burst open. The outlaw staggered in, blood soaking his trouser leg but determination in his eyes. He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Abigail. Time seemed to slow, her mind recording with perfect clarity the coldness in the man's eyes, the steadiness of his hand despite his wound, the certainty that she was about to die. Two shots rang out simultaneously, the outlaw's and another from somewhere behind him. Abigail felt the rush of air as a bullet passed inches from her head, embedding itself in the wall behind her. The outlaw looked surprised, then crumpled to the floor, revealing Pike standing in the doorway, his smoking gun still raised. "Pike!" Abigail cried, relief flooding through her. He moved toward her swiftly, pulling her against his chest with his free arm while keeping his gun trained on the fallen outlaw. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with fear. "No," she assured him, "I'm fine." "But you're bleeding." The makeshift bandage on his side was soaked through with fresh blood, his face pale beneath his tan. "Later," Pike said tersely. "We need to secure the house first." He raised his voice. "Liam, Jacob." "Still here," Liam called back. Jacob got one of them, the others using the water trough for cover. Pike guided Abigail to a protected corner. "Stay here," he instructed, his tone brooking no argument this time. Despite her earlier resolve to stand her ground, Abigail nodded, recognizing that Pike needed to focus on the remaining threat without worrying about her safety. Moving with the fluid grace of a predator despite his wound, Pike positioned himself at a window, quickly assessing the situation. "He's pinned down," he told Liam. "No clear escape route." "Ranch hands circling behind him," Jacob added, "should have him in a crossfire any minute." As if on cue, shots rang out from the direction of the barn. The outlaw behind the water trough returned fire briefly, then raised his hands in surrender. "Don't shoot," he called. "I give up." The immediate danger past, Abigail rushed to Pike's side. His skin had taken on an alarming grayish tinge, and he leaned heavily against the wall, his strength clearly flagging. "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, guiding him to a chair. "Liam, bring me the medical kit and hot water." Pike attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Yes, ma'am." As Abigail cut away his blood-soaked shirt to examine the wound, concern tightened her chest. The bullet had torn through his side, leaving a ragged furrow that bled freely, not immediately life-threatening but serious enough to require proper medical attention. "You need a doctor," she said, cleaning the wound as gently as she could. Pike shook his head. "No time, Terrell." "Is secure," Abigail finished for him, having heard the brief report from the ranch hand. Cooper and Manuel have him and his men under guard. Sheriff Mills has been sent for. Everything is under control, Pike. Everyone is safe. The tension seemed to drain from Pike's body at her words, leaving him suddenly vulnerable in a way Abigail had rarely seen. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. When Terrell said he'd sent men here, I thought I might lose you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling. You didn't. I'm right here, she smiled softly, though I did disobey your instructions to hide in the cellar. A surprised laugh escaped Pike, followed by a wince of pain. Why am I not surprised? You haven't followed a single order since the day you arrived. Good thing, too, she teased gently, continuing to dress his wound. Or I'd still be on that stage east and you'd be bleeding out alone in this house. Pike sobered, his gray eyes intense as they held hers. I love you, Abigail Foster, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. The simple declaration, delivered in the aftermath of violence and danger, struck Abigail with its profound truth. This man, complicated, wounded, fiercely protective, had become the center of her world in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first sought him out for revenge. And I love you, Pike Xander, she replied, her voice steady with certainty. Enough to shoot a man today to protect our home. Pike's expression shifted from tenderness to concern. You shot someone. The man who came through the back door, I hit him in the leg before he reached the house. Abigail's hands continued their work on his bandage, steady despite the memory. I aimed to wound like you taught me. Pride mingled with regret in Pike's eyes. I never wanted you to have to use those lessons. But I'm glad I had them, Abigail countered. The frontier doesn't allow for helplessness, as you've often reminded me. I won't be a liability to you, Pike, not ever. He caught her hand, pressing it against his heart. You could never be a liability, Abigail, you're my strength. My hope, the reason I fought so hard to get back here today. The depth of emotion in his words humbled her. This was the man behind the legend of the ghost, not cold or unfeeling, but passionate and loyal beyond measure. A man who had lost faith in humanity until she had given him reason to believe again. We should get you to bed, Abigail said, finishing the bandage. You've lost a lot of blood. Pike allowed her to help him stand, leaning on her more heavily than he would have permitted anyone else to witness. As they made their slow way toward the bedroom, Sheriff Mills arrived with deputies to take custody of the captured outlaws. Terrell, Mills asked, taking in Pike's wounded state with concern. Captured alive, Pike confirmed. Cooper and Manuel are holding him at the mill site. Mills nodded approvingly. I'll send men to bring them in. You get some rest, Xander. Looks like you've earned it. As the sheriff departed to organize the prisoner's transport, Pike turned to Abigail with a weary smile. Seems like our quest for justice is finally complete. Eleanor exposed, Terrell captured, all our ghosts laid to rest. Almost, Abigail agreed, helping him onto the bed. Just one thing remains unfinished. Pike raised an eyebrow questioningly. Our wedding, she reminded him with a smile, once you're healed, of course. Pike's answering smile held all the warmth and promise of the future they would build together. I can think of no better way to close one chapter and begin another. As Abigail settled beside him, her hand in his, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had arrived on his doorstep seeking vengeance, a woman defined by betrayal and loss. Now she prepared to become his wife, a woman defined by love and the home they would create together. The path had been neither simple nor straight, marked by danger and revelation in equal measure. But as she watched Pike's eyes close in exhausted sleep, his face peaceful in a way she had rarely seen it, Abigail knew with bone-deep certainty that every step had led precisely where they were meant to be. Together, home, whole. Epilogue 1 year later. The October morning dawned clear and crisp, sunlight glinting off the new windows of the expanded ranch house. Abigail stood on the front porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands as she surveyed the transformation of Pike's one-saw-steer property into a thriving homestead. The sawmill on the north section operated at full capacity under Jim Cooper's expert management, supplying lumber not only to Silver Creek but to settlements throughout the territory. Sarah Cooper had established a small school for the children of ranch hands and mill workers, including her own Daniel and several other families who had settled nearby, drawn by the promise of steady work. Liam had been promoted to foreman of the ranch operations, while Manuel oversaw the expanded herd that now numbered over 1,000 head. The original ranch house had nearly doubled in size, with a proper dining room for entertaining, additional bedrooms, and the study Pike had promised Abigail, its shelves lined with books ordered from as far away as San Francisco and Chicago. Most significant of all was the small nursery adjacent to their bedroom, its walls freshly painted in anticipation of the child Abigail carried, due to arrive with the spring. "Admiring your kingdom," Pike's voice came from behind her, followed by his arms wrapping around her waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. Abigail leaned back against his chest, smiling. "Our kingdom," she corrected, though I was actually thinking about how much has changed in a year. Pike made a sound of agreement, his chin resting on the top of her head. Silver Creek's hardly recognizable with the new bank building and the school going up. Bailey tells me the population's doubled since last fall. And our personal changes have been even more dramatic, Abigail mused. Marriage, the expansion, the baby coming. She turned in his arms to face him. "Are you happy, Pike?" The question was one she rarely asked, knowing how difficult Pike still found it to voice his emotions. But today, on the anniversary of the day they had faced down Terrell and his men, the day they had finally put the past to rest, she wanted to hear the words. Pike studied her face, the guardedness that had once been his default expression now replaced by an open tenderness he reserved for her alone. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he said simply. "More than I deserve." "You deserve every happiness," Abigail insisted, reaching up to touch his cheek, now sporting the neatly trimmed beard he'd grown over the winter. "You've built something remarkable here, Pike. Not just a successful ranch but a community, a place where people can start over, find purpose." "We built it," he corrected, echoing her earlier amendment. "None of this would exist without you, Abigail. You were the catalyst for everything that followed." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their moment. Pike looked toward the road, tension briefly tightening his shoulders until he recognized the riders. "Marshal Reynolds," he identified, "and it looks like he's brought company." Abigail followed his gaze, surprised to see a woman riding alongside the marshal, a dark-haired figure in a practical riding habit that spoke of long travel, sitting her horse with the ease of someone who had spent months in the saddle. As they drew closer, Abigail's eyes widened in recognition. It had been years and the woman was older, more weathered, but there was no mistaking the sharp intelligence in those dark eyes. "Rebecca," Abigail breathed. Pike glanced at her. "Rebecca Thornton." "It is," Abigail said, moving to the edge of the porch as the riders reined in. Marshal Reynolds tipped his hat. "Morning, Pike, Mrs. Zander. I brought someone who insisted on meeting the woman who finally brought Alina Wilcox to justice." Rebecca Thornton dismounted before the marshal could assist her, dusting off her skirts with a brisk, no-nonsense motion that reminded Abigail instantly of herself. She walked up the steps, her gaze fixed on Abigail. "Abigail Foster," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Or should I say, Abigail Zander, you look different." "I am," Abigail admitted, taking the woman's offered hands. "And so are you, Rebecca. I barely recognized you." "California agrees with me," Rebecca said. "I run a shipping office in San Francisco now. My husband is a captain on the Pacific Run." She squeezed Abigail's hands. "When the marshal contacted me when he told me you were fighting Alina, I knew I had to come. Your sister destroyed my life in Boston, Abigail, but in doing so she gave me the push I needed to find a better one." "She did the same for me," Abigail realized, looking back at Pike, who had come to stand beside her, his hand resting warm and heavy on her shoulder. "Then perhaps we should send her a thank-you note," Rebecca suggested with a dry laugh, "ideally to her prison cell." "She's in prison?" Abigail asked, looking at Reynolds. The marshal nodded, dismounting. "Fraud, embezzlement, forgery." The territorial judge didn't look kindly on any of it. Henry Wilcox turned state's evidence against his wife to save his own skin, though he'll still serve time. Alina. "Well, she's facing 10 years. A profound silence settled over the porch. 10 years. It was a heavy sentence, a final, crushing defeat for the woman who had sought to destroy so many lives. "It's over," Pike said quietly, his voice for Abigail alone, truly over. Abigail leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest, the protective weight of his arm around her. She looked at Rebecca, living proof that there was life after scandal. She looked at the thriving ranch, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, the home she had built with the man she loved. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." She turned in Pike's arms, looking up into the gray eyes that had once been so cold and were now filled with a warmth that melted the last of her old fears. "I told you once that I came west for justice," she said. "And you got it," Pike replied. "I got something better," she corrected, reaching up to kiss him as the wind whispered through the pines, no longer a lonely sound but a song of peace. "I got a life." Pike smiled, the expression transforming his face, making him look younger, lighter, free, "and I got a reason to live it." He kissed her then, deep and slow, oblivious to the smiling marshal and the old friend watching from the yard. The gunslinger and the lady, the ghost and the outcast, they had found each other in the wilderness, and in doing so they had found their way home.